Today, we're here to talk to you about FEMA's public assistance program following a declared disaster, and specifically some private nonprofit specific guidance for navigating the FEMA public assistance program. On the agenda for this presentation will be FEMA public assistance, also known as PA. What is it? FEMA eligibility for private nonprofits. We'll go through both applicant, facility, and work and cost eligibility. The Small Business Administration requirement, does it apply to you? And then I'll give some examples specific to houses of worship. First, what is public assistance? The mission of FEMA's public assistance program is to assist states, territories, tribal governments, local governments, and certain types of private nonprofit organizations to recover and respond from major disasters that are declared by the president. Through the PA program, FEMA provides federal grant assistance for activities such as disaster debris removal, emergency protective measures, and the restoration of facilities that are damaged by disasters. Roles and responsibilities. There are sort of four players within the public assistance grant program. FEMA, they are the federal awarding agency that's authorized to manage the public assistance program and to provide the funding. Their primary responsibility is to assist applicants and the state in the development of project applications and then reviewing them to make sure that they comply with laws, regulations, and policy. They are who make the determination about whether an activity is eligible under the grant program. Applicants are entities that are submitting a request for public assistance under the recipient's federal award. And the recipient, in this case, is the state of Iowa. It is the state government that receives the money from FEMA and then disperses it to the eligible subrecipients. And the subrecipients are applicants who have received a subaward and are then bound by the conditions of the award and subaward. So until you receive funding in the FEMA Public Assistance Program, you are considered an applicant, and then once you receive a subaward, you will be considered a subrecipient. They use these words somewhat interchangeably, so just know that you might be called an applicant or a subrecipient depending on where you are in the process, and that the recipient that you will be working through to get the FEMA funding is the state of Iowa. FEMA Public Assistance has project categories lettered A through G. They are divided into two categories, emergency work and permanent work. Emergency work includes debris removal and emergency protective measures, things done during the disaster itself to help save lives, protect health, and protect property. Permanent work is the restoration/repair of roads and bridges, water control facilities, buildings and equipment, utilities, and parks, recreational, and other facilities that were damaged by the disaster. In emergency work, mainly this Cat B emergency protective measures, only overtime hours for your force account labor are eligible. For debris removal and for permanent work, both regular and overtime hours are eligible. This shows the timeline that you will have to complete these types of categories during the FEMA Public Assistance Grant. For categories A and B, which are emergency work, you have 6 months from the date of the disaster to complete the work. For permanent work, you have 18 months to complete the permanent work. There are opportunities to receive extensions. Those would need to go through the recipient. So Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management is who will have to pursue any extension on either of these deadlines. How do I apply? So to apply for the public assistance program, once an event has been declared, private nonprofits are required to document that they are eligible to be in the public assistance program by providing the following: a ruling letter from the IRS granting them tax exemption under sections 501C, D, or E of the Internal Revenue Code, or documentation from the state substantiating that it is a non-revenue producing, non-profit entity doing business under state law. You must provide proof of ownership or use of a facility, so either a lease or some type of ownership documentation, or other proof of legal responsibility to repair the damage that occurred due to the disaster. And then a list of services that are provided in the damaged facility, when they are provided, and to whom. Once you have all of this documentation, the request for public assistance, or RPA, should be submitted via the EM Grants Pro system. And there are YouTube directions on how to do this on the website for Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Next, there might be some additional documentation that is required depending on what type of an applicant you are. If your facilities are mixed use facilities, you need to provide proof of the established purpose of the facility. So this could be with IRS documentation, your charter, your bylaws or amendments, or evidence of long-standing routine day-to-day use, such as a calendar of activities. If your nonprofit involves membership, then there needs to be submitted some membership organization documents, such as who is allowed membership, what fees you charge, and a policy regarding waiving memberships in cases of financial hardship. If you are a child care facility, you need to provide proof that the State Department of Children and Family Services, the Department of Human Services, or a similar agency recognizes you as a licensed child care facility. And finally, if you are a school, you must demonstrate that you are recognized by the state as providing elementary or secondary education. This graphic shows the FEMA PA process that you will go through to receive your grant funding. It will start with you submitting your RPA, which is the second bullet on the slide. The first bullet is attend an applicant briefing, which you may have already done, and if not, you can find videos of the applicant briefings at the website of Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Once you have submitted your request for public assistance, there will be an exploratory call between you and FEMA, followed by a longer meeting called the Recovery Scoping Meeting to determine what all your damages were during the disaster. Following this, they will develop with you a damage inventory of all of the damages that you have from the incident. After this is the period where they are documenting the damage. This may involve a site inspection with a site inspector, and this will involve you reviewing and approving your damage descriptions and dimensions. Following this, a scope of work and cost estimate will be developed, and then all of the documentation will be reviewed for eligibility and then signed by everybody involved saying that they approve what is in the grant application and that they agree to the terms of the public assistance grant program. There are some limitations of the public assistance program. It is a reimbursement program, which means it does not typically provide upfront money for the work. For Category B work, only overtime is eligible for reimbursement. There are considerable documentation requirements under the public assistance program, and the federal government does require a stringent procurement process be followed. Finally, depending on the work, there can be environmental and historic property requirements that must be followed during the repair process. The four basic components of eligibility under public assistance are applicant, facility, work, and cost. We previously discussed that an applicant must be a state, territory, tribe, local government, or private nonprofit organization, and the documentation that a private nonprofit organization must be able to submit to show that they are eligible. A facility must be a building, public works system, equipment, or natural feature. The work, regardless of whether it is emergency or permanent, must be required as a result of the declared disaster, located within the designated disaster area, and must be the legal responsibility of the applicant. The cost is the funding that must be tied directly to eligible work and must be adequately documented, authorized, it must be necessary, and it must be cost reasonable. Again, a reminder of what documentation will be required when you submit your request for public assistance to show that you are an eligible P&P. Once it has been determined that you are an eligible applicant, FEMA will also need to look at whether you own or operate an eligible facility. For private nonprofits, an eligible facility is one that provides an eligible service. An eligible service may be a critical service defined as education, utilities, emergency, or medical, or a facility that provides a non-critical but essential social service and provides those services to the general public. Facilities that are established or primarily used for political, athletic, recreational, vocational, or academic training, conferences, or similar activities are ineligible. Facility use cannot be limited to any of the following: a certain number of individuals, a defined group of individuals who have a financial interest in the facility, such as a condo association, certain classes of individuals, an unreasonably restrictive geographical area, such as a neighborhood within a community. Note, certain types of facilities, such as senior centers, that restrict access in a manner clearly related to the nature of the facility are still considered to provide essential social services to the general public. Any membership fees charged must meet all of the following criteria. They must be nominal. They must be waived when an individual can show inability to pay the fee. They cannot be of such magnitude to preclude use by a significant portion of the community, and they cannot exceed what is appropriate based on other facilities used for similar services. This table shows some examples of ineligible facilities. For private nonprofit facilities that provide multiple services, referred to as mixed-use facilities, eligibility is dependent on the primary use of the facility. Primary use is determined by the amount of physical space dedicated to eligible versus ineligible services. Primary use is the use for which more than 50% of the physical space in the facility is dedicated. FEMA evaluates the entire structure when determining primary use. It does not separately address individual areas. Common space, such as bathrooms, hallways, lobbies, closets, stairways, and elevators, are not included when calculating mixed-use space. If FEMA determines that 50% or more of the physical space is dedicated to ineligible services, the entire facility is considered ineligible. If the facility is eligible, FEMA will prorate funding based on the percentage of physical space dedicated to eligible services. Emergency work. Again, this is the work that is done during a disaster or directly after it to prevent further damage to property and for saving lives and protecting health. It includes debris removal. So that would be debris removal that is associated with an eligible facility, and then emergency protective measures to prevent damage to the facility and its contents. Most emergency protective measures under public assistance are the responsibility of state, local, tribal, and territory governments. Therefore, nonprofits are generally not legally responsible for those services, and FEMA does not provide public assistance funding to PNPs for the costs associated with providing those services. PNPs that own or operate medical or custodial care facility are eligible for direct reimbursement of costs related to patient evacuation. In limited circumstances, FEMA may also reimburse a PNP directly when essential components of a facility are urgently needed to save lives or protect health and safety, such as an emergency room of a PNP hospital or a PNP sewage or water treatment facility. FEMA may also reimburse volunteer fire departments directly as an eligible applicant. For permanent work, the work must still be the legal responsibility of the applicant requesting assistance. FEMA will evaluate whether the applicant claiming the cost had the legal responsibility for disaster-related restoration of the facility, based on ownership and the terms of any written agreements. FEMA provides public assistance funding to restore facilities based on pre-disaster design and function in conformity with current applicable codes and standards. Eligible codes and standards must be legally adopted by the local jurisdiction. FEMA does not recognize codes or standards adopted by a private nonprofit specifically for its facilities. Any hazard mitigation the private nonprofit undertakes must either be funded at no more than 15% of repair costs or be shown to be cost-effective by inclusion in the Papa G version 4 Appendix J or through an acceptable cost-effectiveness analysis, such as FEMA's benefit cost analysis tool. FEMA provides public assistance funding to all eligible applicants at a cost share of no less than 75%, which means that FEMA provides 75% of the funding as the grant. Eligible costs must be directly tied to the performance of eligible work, adequately documented, reduced by all applicable credits such as insurance proceeds and salvage values, authorized and not prohibited under federal, state, local government laws or regulations, consistent with the applicant's internal policies and procedures, and necessary and reasonable to accomplish the work properly and efficiently. Examples of ineligible costs include anything that is a duplication of a benefit. So an applicant is not allowed to receive disaster-related funding from two sources for the same item of work. And loss of revenue, including tax revenue, is also an example of an ineligible cost. FEMA cannot provide public assistance funding that duplicates insurance proceeds. Consequently, FEMA reduces eligible costs by the amount of actual insurance proceeds, if known, or anticipated insurance proceeds based on the applicant's insurance policy, if the actual amount is unknown. FEMA will subsequently adjust the eligible costs based on the actual amount of insurance proceeds the applicant receives. FEMA requires that the applicant take reasonable efforts to pursue claims to recover insurance proceeds that it is entitled to receive from its insurer. FEMA may limit funding if the insurance policy provides coverage that should be pursued and the applicant does not pursue it. Volunteers and donated resources. If you had volunteers or received donated resources that you used in either emergency work or permanent work, you may be able to use the volunteer hours or donations to offset the cost share for you. If you had volunteers or donated resources, it is important that you track the volunteer hours and the work completed by those volunteers and what donations you received, and that you mention the donations volunteers on your exploratory call with FEMA. The applicant may apply the volunteer donated resources offset if all of the following conditions are met. The donated resource is from a third party. The donated resource is necessary and reasonable. The applicant uses the resource in the performance of eligible work and within the respective project's period of performance, and that the resource be tracked, including the description, specific locations, and hours. The resource must be tracked for permanent work to the specific project for which it is associated. What is the SBA loan requirement for private nonprofits, and do you need to apply for an SBA loan? Following a major disaster declaration, the Small Business Administration provides loans to individuals and businesses for facility restoration of facilities damaged by the disaster. For private nonprofits with facilities that provide non-critical essential social services, FEMA provides public assistance funding for eligible debris removal and emergency protective measures. However, FEMA only provides funding for permanent work costs that an SBA loan will not cover. Therefore, private nonprofits that do not provide any critical services must also apply for a disaster loan from the SBA and receive a determination for permanent work on facilities that provide non-critical services or are mixed-use facilities and the damaged portion of the facility provides services that are entirely non-critical. If an SBA application is required, it is critical that you apply for it by the deadline, or you will not be eligible for public assistance for permanent work. So if your PNP provides critical services, an SBA application is not required for either emergency work or permanent work. However, if you provide a non-critical but essential government service, while an SBA application is not required for emergency work, it is required for permanent work. These tables give an example of what is considered a critical facility. In general, critical services are education, emergency/medical, utilities, and emergency services. Again, these types of P&Ps do not have to apply to an SBA loan for permanent work. This next slide shows some examples of non-critical facilities. These types of facilities do have to apply for an SBA loan for permanent work prior to pursuing public assistance. Let's walk through this table to see some possible SBA loan outcomes. So first, is the P&P facility critical? If yes, everything is PA eligible. If no, then you have to figure out if you are doing any emergency work. If you are doing emergency work, you need to have applied for the SBA loan within the SBA deadline, or the permanent work will not be eligible. If the SBA location is approved, then you continue down to see if it fully covers the permanent work price. If it does, then there is nothing left for FEMA to pay for, and the permanent work will not be eligible under public assistance. If it does not fully cover the permanent work cost, then the costs beyond the approved loan amount will be eligible for public assistance. If the SBA loan application does not get approved, then the permanent work is also potentially eligible under FEMA public assistance. Next, we're going to go over the various SBA declarations, the counties that are declared for them, and how to submit your SBA application. This first slide shows the SBA loan declarations for DR 4779. That is the FEMA disaster number. In order to determine if you are eligible for these SBA loans, you will check to see if you are on this list of counties that are declared, and also check to make sure that DR 4779 is the FEMA disaster that caused the damage and the costs to your facility. If these are the SBA declarations that apply to you, you can submit your application for the disaster loan online at this website, lending.sba.gov, or you can contact the SBA's Customer Service Center via email or by phone for assistance. You do want to make sure that you are one of these counties listed under either of these two SBA declarations. This next one is for FEMA Disaster 4784. Again, you will want to check and make sure that the county that your facility is in is listed on either of these two declarations, and that disaster 4784 is the one that caused the damage to your facility. The application spot, customer service email, and customer service phone number are the same. And finally, these are the SBA declarations for DR 4796. Again, make sure that you see your county listed as one of the counties declared, and that DR 4796 was the disaster that you are planning on applying for public assistance for, and that damaged your facility. I do want to talk briefly about houses of worship in public assistance. In 2018, houses of worship were officially added as eligible private nonprofit facilities. FEMA announced on January 2nd of 2018 that houses of worship are eligible for disaster assistance without regard to their secular or religious nature. PNP houses of worship are eligible for public assistance as facilities that provide a non-critical essential social service to the general public. Note that they do provide a non-critical service and therefore do have to apply for an SBA loan for permanent work. They are treated like any other eligible non-critical PNP facility. Houses of worship cannot be deemed ineligible because leadership or membership in the organization operating the house of worship is limited to persons who share a religious faith or practice. So now I would like to give some examples because houses of worship sometimes operate facilities that serve several different functions. The first example that I want to give is a school operated by a religious institution. The community church operates a state-certified private school offering 1st through 8th grade. The teaching curriculum includes math, science, English, history, PE, and religious doctrine. The school has an average attendance of 500 students. The campus consists of 3 buildings, one used primarily for the secular curriculum, one used primarily for religious instruction, and a chapel primarily used for religious worship. Admissions to the school are restricted to members of the community church. What facilities would be eligible under public assistance? Each of the buildings will be evaluated separately by FEMA. The 2 buildings used for secular and religious education are eligible as educational facilities. As educational facilities, they are considered to provide a critical service, and therefore, community church does not need to apply to the SBA to receive funding for permanent work on those buildings. The chapel is eligible as a house of worship. Houses of worship provide non-critical services, so community church is required to apply for an SBA loan for the chapel. The restricted admissions process does not affect eligibility in this case because no PNP facility is allowed to be excluded from eligibility because leadership or membership in the organization is limited to people that share a religious faith or practice. Second example, a religious institution with a dock, a church, and a pastor's residence. A religious institution owns multiple structures within its campus. One of the structures is a dock, primarily used for recreation. The buildings include a church that provides worship services and a pastoral residence. Which facilities would be eligible? Again, FEMA will evaluate the structures separately. The dock is ineligible because its use is primarily recreational, which is an ineligible service. The church is eligible because its primary use is as a house of worship. The residence is not eligible because a private residence is not an eligible PNP service. The applicant must apply for an SBA loan for repairs to the church as it provides a non-critical service. All of the other buildings would be considered ineligible by FEMA public assistance. This is a list of FEMA public assistance guidance documents. The Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide, which is frequently referred to as the Papa G, version 4, provides the policies that must be followed for FEMA public assistance. FEMA does maintain an archive of all of their FEMA public assistance policies, and they do provide some documentation on the process of public assistance grants. Thank you. If you have any questions, please direct them to the Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency, who will be happy to help you navigate the public assistance process. Thank you.